Good afternoon to all. I welcome you to the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association webinar on workplace brain capital, how to unlock economic vitality and human flourishing. So this webinar is organized in collaboration with the Rice University Baker Institute Center for Health and Bioscience and the Brain Capital Alliance. So this topic is very important nowadays to rethink our workplaces, which in fact is essential for enhancing a brain healthy environment and also essential to enhance well-being and flourishing, which in fact involves ultimately creating an environment that supports both mental and physical health of employees, and at the same time enhancing the capability of the employees and also whoever is working in the workplace to develop their own flourishing and contribute to overall well-being. So basically, we can think of different elements in that sense. First of all, we've been for many years trying to find this balance between work and life balance, which in fact encourage in a way through flexible work arrangement. For example, remote work or flexible hours, which helps, in fact, the workers overall to find the balance between their professional responsibilities and personal life. I think this has been quite essential during the COVID-19 and the pandemic, where we have been almost obliged to be working from homes and doing this remote work. And this has, in fact, provided us a way to do it and to do it right and to manage it over time. And I think this has brought quite an important value over time. But also beyond this, it's important to design a stimulating work environment, which in fact allow a collaboration between the team members, allow also creativity with in fact open areas to brainstorm, to work together for the benefit of the activities and the work. And I think this is all essential. Also promoting this type of environment where it's connected to the nature. And I think this is also important to rethink in fact our inbuilt spaces for working and enhancing, our productivity and our brain health. Essential to this in reality, as I mentioned, is to promote and support our mental health. And in fact, this also helps us for enhancing our capability within the job and also to feel, in fact, that we are empowered to develop our work and our brain skills. But also beyond this is to encourage physical well-being and also learning and developing over the time within the job. And these are all promoted by skills development over time, and also promoting the capability, in fact, to learn over time beyond really executing the activities in the job. And I think those type of skills that we would like also to explore today are beyond, in fact, the cognitive skills that we acquire through our education, but mainly also related to emotional intelligence, for example, resilience and adaptability, problem solving, critical thinking, strategic thinking, creativity, and innovation beyond, the specific task that everybody has, but also working in teams. And I think collective creation and collective creativity, it's essential also for creating the bonds between the different team members. And this is also something that could be very empowering within the workplace. But of course, all of this, these are what we call the theoretical expectations that could be very well useful to develop the brain capital. And I think brain capital concept is an essential concept that could also pave the way to enhancing economic prosperity, human well-being, and flourishing. And with this, I would like to welcome our speakers for today's webinar to discuss these exciting, very exciting topics, very new topics that could be part of our transformative thinking of a new economic model, a new economy, which are centered into well-being and centered into people. So I would like to start without further ado to introduce my friend and colleague, Haris Ayer. Haris, he's a senior fellow at the Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy. He is Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association advisor and the lead for the Brain Capital Alliance, and he has been working for years now to push this idea of neuroscience-based policy and how the brain capital via the neuroscience research could be the lever, the brain capital, the asset for our economies. So Haris, again, thank you for joining us today, and I'm happy to see you on screen, and the floor is yours.
Let me bring my slides up. Can you see them?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, it's thinking.
Yeah.
Well, it's good.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Rim, for hosting us today, and thanks for the introductory remarks, and good to see you. So I want to talk about how the workplace can advance the brain positive economy. I want to give you my thesis for the day. So we are transitioning, or we want to transition to a brain positive economy. We believe that the current economy is brain negative, it's depleting brain capital, and we need to transition. And so the brain positive economy is a global goal to stop and reverse the loss of brain capital. And we believe that it's good for people and good for the economy as well. So this is sort of the overarching thesis that we have and the transition that we're advancing. And we've written about this most recently by the Brookings Institution, if anyone's interested. Brain capital is an economic asset that incorporates brain health and brain skills. Brain capital, we believe, should be given as much attention as GDP and then also road and bridge infrastructure. We think it's like a critical form of gray matter infrastructure for societies. It's not only important now, but also in the future. And brain capital, as you can see in this slide, doesn't just incorporate health components, it also gets into education and workforce components through brain skills. We think key brain skills are things such as resilience, creativity, and critical thinking. So we have a significant issue with the high cost of brain health disorders. Here you can see data from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. This is still preliminary data, but the cost here in lost income for people living with brain health conditions is $1.22 trillion a year. So if you also incorporate the cost to health systems, it's probably around double that. So this is seriously problematic for individuals, for families, but also for the workplaces and the economy. This is a threat to economic security, we believe, at a national level. And you can see here that the rate of growth is 5.3% annually. So we need to think transformationally to try to solve these issues, is our argument. And you could see on the right-hand side there, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and migraine are the most costly in terms of lost income. So keep those in mind as we're thinking about the issues to solve in the workplace. So the brain negative economy is obviously multifactorial that we're living in now. We think about these challenges like the industrialized food system, air pollution, chemical and plastic pollution. We don't know exactly what plastic pollution breaking down into nanoparticles is doing to us, but it's great. This week in Ottawa, there is the Global Plastics Treaty being discussed and hopefully passed, which will look to significantly reduce the amount of plastic pollution in the world. which will reduce this potential threat to our brains. Extreme weather events, of course, is very relevant to employees that are working out in the field. We have social media issues, mis and disinformation, which is particularly challenging in the context of this year, where more people are going to the ballot than ever before in history. And then, of course, cybercrime. Most cybercrime is occurring through human factors, which is really brain manipulation. So all of these factors, you can tell, are very, very relevant to the workplace. And what we want to unpack a bit more today. How do we change these things and reduce their burden? The results of this, of all the issues that I showed on that slide, is educational disruptions, low labor productivity, which is a big issue in the workplace, suboptimal workforce skills, as we'll talk about. Many companies are going through transitions of their own, whether it's green energy transitions or using more AI. So we need optimized workforce skills. We can't have this sort of sub-optimization. We need to support people to upskill and reskill, so on and so forth. I've mentioned the other ones previously in prior slides. We're not just passive victims of the economy, of course. We have the ability as individuals and as companies to actually shape the economy. So we have the ability through the workplace to boost creativity of our workers, to boost green skills, our ability to engineer sustainability and green solutions for the future, which is so important to tackle climate. We have the ability to be pro-social and to obviously optimize productivity. So we can influence the economy, and we should, and that is the kind of positive message that we'd like to share today. So the workplace is a key environment. I was shocked by these statistics that the average person spends 90,000 hours at work over a lifetime. So this is big stuff, and that's 1/3 of our life is spent at work. And it makes sense, I guess, but until you see those numbers, it's really striking. So we have the ability to really shape people in a positive way throughout their lifespan with that amount of exposure to the workplace. And we have responsibility as employers and even managers of teams to be supportive of people and to argue for what's in their best interest with health and well-being and creativity and such. So at a really high level, it's interesting to note that the White House, the Biden White House, notes that we're moving into a bioeconomy. So this is what the sort of macro trend is in our economy. It's an economy that is where the activity is mostly around biotech and biomanufacturing, and that makes sense. We're no longer in an agrarian economy or an industrialized economy. We're moving into a next level of bioeconomy. So that means we need to harness the power of biology to create new products and services if we want significant economic growth in the future and to be successful as a country in the United States, but then also to outcompete non-democratic near-peer competitors as well. So the bioeconomy is obviously extremely relevant in solutions for health and climate, et cetera, across sectors. This means, of course, a very major change in the need to upskill and reskill the labor market and to change the nature of the labor market. It's a lot about it is skills-based. So one interesting thing that we can think about now with the rise of generative AI in the workplace is algorithmic literacy. We think that this is key to think about and to boost. So obviously, algorithm literacy is essential given algorithm-driven technologies are prevalent and they influence our decision-making and our participation in work and in also society. Algorithms can be our friends, they can be our co-pilots, or algorithms can be very manipulative of us. They can be cyber threats, and they can be mis and disinformation threats, and they can also throw up bad information at us. So building that literacy is key. And here down on the bottom left are ways that we can think about boosting algorithm literacy. We think algorithm literacy is a key brain skill now to be developed in the coming decades. So I want to make a shout out that workplace is key, but also the school to workplace pipeline is also vital. And so we're very grateful to Tim Fox and people at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education for supporting us in thinking through this school to workplace pipeline and how we start to build brain capital in schools, working with superintendents and school teachers to try to empower them, recognizing that school teachers and superintendents are arguably the biggest brain builders in society. So I just wanted to make a shout out for this continuum. Then there are a couple of other interesting points I wanted to get on the table for the discussion. This is factors coming from the national security workforce. On the left-hand side, you can see a report by RAND looking at how to engage people that are neurodiverse in the national security workforce. And this engaging people that are neurodiverse, being inclusive in the workplace, is not just relevant to national security, right? It's just a generally good thing in workplaces, supporting folks with dyslexia, autism spectrum disorder, etc. And Steve Carnevale, who will talk later, has a lot of expertise in the dyslexia side, having created the UCSF Dyslexia Center. On the right-hand side, we see an interesting report also from RAND on the issues of dementia in the national security workforce, which obviously is very relevant to them because of the sensitive material, the top secret material that's being handled by national security workers. So how do we deal with those risks? But this, of course, is relevant in the world of population aging, as folks will talk about today, that every workplace needs to think about the risk of dementia in the workplace and how to sort of navigate it effectively and humanely. So then the final point I want to make is also the workplace is not just large corporations. The workplace is also small and medium-sized enterprises. And so entrepreneurs, therefore, are really important to think about their brain capital. Interestingly, from an economic perspective, entrepreneurs generate 95% of new jobs in an economy every 5 years. So they're really, really generating economic dynamism if these SMEs are growing and building well. So that means that the people that found these companies and the initial teams, they need to be supported. They often don't have health care. They're often in precarious forms of health insurance. And so thinking about a sort of mental health safety net for entrepreneurs is key. And in this diagram, it just shows that many people that are entrepreneurs, well, we know that anyone that's an entrepreneur ends up having challenges because it's such a fatiguing and exhausting workplace, but they often come into their entrepreneurial career with pre-existing mental health conditions. And so, they're very, very sensitive people to be there. That was, on the one hand, they're resilient, they're also very sensitive. And so we need to think about supporting them in the context of our broader economy. And again, so very key in regards to workplace brain capital and economic dynamism. So thank you very much. And I hope that those were some useful points to start with.
Thank you, Harris, for this overview. I think, like always, you bring very new aspects to the whole concept of brain capital. I have one question, in fact, which relates to the latest report published by the ILO a couple of days ago, which says that climate change creates a cocktail of serious health hazard for 70% of the world workers. And then one of the health consequences, together with cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory diseases, kidney dysfunction, is mental health conditions. So how do you see, in fact, climate change interacting with the brain capital in a constructive manner? Because we know very well that climate change, it's quite destructive, and if we're not prepared for it.
Yes. Well, it's the tough question. How do we think about this in a positive way, Rim? Because it is just that report was so startling. I think that if we can help people to engage in solutioning for climate change, that maybe is one way that we can give them a sense of purpose. To actually make their world of work about tackling those problems. How do we weatherize better? How do we capture carbon better? How do we not have carbon emissions in the first place? So to me, this gets at how do we advance the green transition and get more green skills in the workplace so that people's actual jobs can be tackling these issues. They can have purpose and value out of that. But we obviously have to be very supportive of people, particularly if they're working out in the field, as I think Lawrence Jones may talk about at Edison Electric Institute. A lot of the field workers of power companies are the ones that are stuck out in the field as temperatures get higher. So we have to take this very seriously.
Harris, as you know, we are doing some work to connect brain capital indicators, since we have developed the brain capital dashboard at the Euro-Mediterranean Economics Association, and connecting this to the ESG indicators. I know that the ESG as a concept is not very popular now in the United States, but I think this is a way to assess companies on how they really deal with the environment, social, and governance. And I believe that brain capital and brain-related aspects are very essential, and it could be very much connected not only into the maybe into the social, but could also be in the governance. How do you see this?
I absolutely agree with you, Rim. I think we need to factor brain capital into the accounting frameworks of companies. And so, we obviously really want to work with people that can help us to think that through from a technical perspective. It's essential. We need to sort of run companies based on this partly, and we need to incentivize them to do better. And we can only do that if we have the data and the accounting that will lead to that. And you can also imagine in the future some kind of exchange traded fund where we're further incentivizing companies that have the best brain capital practices in the workplace to do better. But you can also lots of data to track companies' performance based on ESG as well. So.
Thank you very much, Harris, and you stay with us for the discussion. Now I'd like to invite our second speaker, Sarah Lenslock. She is the Senior Vice President for Policy and Brain Health at the AARP. For those who do not know, the AARP is the United States' largest non-for-profit, non-partisan organization dedicated to empowering Americans 50 and older to choose how they live and how they age. So, Sarah, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you for this distinguished panel. It is my pleasure. I am going to share my screen. So it's always a hard act to follow, Harris, but I am pleased to do so. I wanted to start with a basic fact, which is actually quite good news, which is our population is aging. It is a huge success of public health and medical advances that we have an aging demographic. But what that means is that for people in the workforce, that is also an aging workforce. And today in the United States, 1 in 4 workers are over the age of 55. And according to Bain, about 150 million jobs in the G7 will shift to people over the age of 55 by the year 2031. And so all over the G7, we will have workers older than 55. And in the US, that looks like currently 1 in 3 are between the ages of 65 and 69. 1 in 5 are over the age of 70, and 1 in 10 are over the age of 75. And we just expect those numbers to increase. And so the available workforce is aging. So along with aging comes an assumption that let me see if I can get this to move on, that cognitive decline is inevitable when you age. AARP has done significant amount of research on these assumptions and found in a survey, a nationally representative survey of adults 40 and older, that about 60% of people believe that cognitive decline is inevitable. And it turns out that the younger you are, the more likely you are to believe that older workers have some form of cognitive decline. By the time that you age yourself and you find 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, they realize that they are functioning quite well and that they are not subject to cognitive decline. But this is a myth that we have to get our arms around and understand what that is about. So that's the myth. The question is, what is the reality? And it turns out that if you lead a healthy brain lifestyle, you are greatly reducing your risk for cognitive decline. Now, it's not to say that your brain doesn't change. In fact, it's growing, developing throughout your lifespan. Engage in healthy behaviors and promote and support your brain health across your lifespan, you're far more likely to have a stronger brain health. And in fact, simply engaging in these healthy behaviors, we can delay the onset, even for those people who should get dementia, but we can delay onset by half if we can simply postpone decline by 5 years. But I also, at ARP, I work in the policy and lead the policy and brain health work. And part of that work is convening the Global Council on Brain Health to find out what actually works and what doesn't to maintain your brain health as you age. It turns out that the barriers for maintaining brain health, those that don't, is having this perception that it is inevitable. And then those around you, if they are not engaging in healthy behaviors, you're far less likely to engage in those behaviors. So the fact that Harris was talking that you spend a third of your life at work, it's incredibly important that you and those around you are engaging in healthy behaviors so that we can create these healthy environments that sustain brain health. So simply knowing that it's not is a big step forward. But we know that there are many people who are engaging in habits that are destructive of their brain health. Although adults 40 and over believe that their brain health is very important, only about half report doing those lifestyle activities that support them through their lifespan. And actually, I think this number is far lower in reality. People believe they exercise more and eat better than they actually do. So the Global Council on Brain Health has spent the last decade focused on what people could do to maintain your brain health and finding out that, in fact, there's quite a bit. The next area that we've been focusing on is what can people do to assure that they are living these healthy lifestyles. So we have a strong focus on individuals and policymakers to make it more possible to live successfully. But as you will see, when we're talking about community, we're really thinking about where people spend most of their time, and that is in the workforce. So we have a particular focus on employers in the private commercial sector as ways of moving people towards better and healthier lifestyles. So how can employers play a role in shaping an employee's lifestyle choices? Isn't that just an individual thing? Well, in fact, we know that employers have an enormous ability to influence brain healthy behaviors, such as encouraging physical activity, healthy diets, offering wellness opportunities, and including the environment in which people live, work. Their work cultures and vacation policies, exercise spaces. We have the ability to continually shape our environment in the place we spend most of our time. And in fact, the CDC says that we can lower health risk in general for 138 million US workers by tackling this issue from a workforce perspective. One thing I want to point out is that equity matters quite a bit when it comes to brain health. We know that female employees, especially older female employees, are paying the significant cost of care, both economically, financially, and emotionally when it comes to caregiving. And so this is something that employers should be very cognizant of, that in particular, women are the ones who are giving most of the caregiving, not just for children, but for their spouses, relatives, and friends as they age. Low-income multicultural populations face some of the most difficult work environments and have more dangerous jobs and have safety issues associated with it. And finally, at least with respect to the United States, immigrants and migrant workers have fewer protections and higher rates of job-related disabilities. So there's no doubt that the particular jobs influence brain health outcomes. So ARP is working with many of the people who are participating in this call. Kelly O'Brien, Us Against Alzheimer's, Upali Nanda for HKS are founding advisors for the Brain Health Action. And I invite many people who are interested to join us in Brain Health Action to help us transform attitudes about brain health and aging, moving from this idea of stigma and empowering people and communities, including the workforce, to build better brain health at any age. It's certainly possible, and we can support employers who do so by giving them the tools at hand. And I think that Kelly will be discussing more of this specifically. What I just wanted to underscore is that employers and the economics track are absolutely fundamental and foundational to us all living healthier brains, living healthier lives across our lifespan. And if we don't get it right for employers and tell and show employers that, in fact, it's in their own interest, not just necessarily those of their employees, increase productivity, getting more out of their workers, retaining workers, creating the business case for why employers should be supporting the brain health of their employees through describing it as brain capital and having them understand its foundational importance is a critical move for our economy and our society. I'll just leave you with the brainhealthaction.org website, so you can check out more of the opportunities that we have to work together. And finally, ARP's resources on what you can do to maintain your brain health are available through the Global Council on Brain Health. That is an independent organization that ARP supports to bring the best, most credible evidence forward on the science behind maintaining brain health. StayingSharp.org is a digital platform available for free to anyone around the world who wants to have tools to help them live a brain healthy lifestyle. And finally, our Brain Health Resource Center provides lots of resources to everyone, again, for free, no matter where you are in the world. Thank you very much. Here's my contact information, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah. This is very comprehensive, and I think your initiative on the Brain Health Action, it's very essential nowadays. I have a question. Do you have or do you come to know sister organization like AARP in other parts of the world that you collaborate with? And do you see, for example, the possibility to develop an international coalition for this brain health action, which will promote the changing behavior of employers and employees at the same time toward really reverting this cognitive decline? You mentioned it's more than 50%, but I believe that it can be even more. And then this also really, in my view, we need to move in a way globally to be able to make a difference. What do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll have to say that, no, there's not another organization that I'm aware of that's exactly like ARP, although there are many organizations fostering welfare in individual disease states. But I think the closest and probably one of the best is the World Health Organization's unit on brain health. And we are working with them, as I'm sure there are many on this call or listening to this tape who are, but the WHO is very much working towards a public health campaign, and it is thinking about the importance of all of these issues and acting as a great leader in this instance. And so we can find a great partnership with the WHO and affiliated organizations throughout Europe and North America. There is a Canadian aging group that is somewhat similar to AARP, but frankly, motivating our governments, and I know that many of us on the call are working with UN agencies and others to facilitate the support of communication around these issues and the development of public health measures that will support them, both in the workplace and in other areas.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm sure you know what we are doing within the Brain Capital Alliance. Our ambition is to develop a global alliance, and with the leadership of Harris, we are trying slowly and progressively to really move into this whole thinking of brain capital, which in reality, it feels the purpose. It fits the purpose of what we were talking about, having a more healthy brains, but at the same time, accompanying with the skills needed for the workforce with these new skills that our economies need nowadays. So thank you very much again for your contribution.
And I want to thank you for the Brain Capital Alliance, because I think it's essential work and you really made great strides so quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Josefina Cruzat. She's a professor, Latin American Brain Health Institute at the University of Adolfo Ibáñez. So Josefina, the floor is yours to give us some hints on what is happening over there.
Thank you. You see the slide?
Not yet.
No?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. So good morning, and thank you for welcoming me. And thank you to Harris and Sarah for their very interesting views. Today, I'm going to bring into the discussion the crucial intersection between neuroscience, brain health, and economic factors, especially focusing in Chile, but at the same time, taking Chile as a representative country of a broader trend that we have observed throughout Latin America. As Chile ages rapidly, and I think the global population is doing that, we are facing a future where a third of our population will be seniors by 2050, placing unprecedented demands on our economy and healthcare systems, which are exacerbated by the sharp income inequality in our region. And despite some improvements, our Gini coefficient indicates that income inequality is still a big issue for us, especially when we compare ourselves to healthier countries. And these demographic changes also predict a substantial increase in mental health problems, with more than a fifth of Chileans currently facing such challenges, and a health system that it's already operating at its limit, especially after the pandemic. And these mental health issues are, of course, also having profound impact on workplaces, with near 70% of medical leaves in 2022 attributed to mental health, with depression and anxiety leading the list, and with the heaviest burden on women and essential sectors such as health, education, and public administration. So in this context, there is a relevant question that emerges, which is how do socioeconomic disparities influence brain health and disease progression? And now more and more, we are seeing very clear evidence that these disparities are critical to both clinical outcomes and the biological process of diseases like dementia. So in this regard, research has repeatedly shown a strong link between socioeconomic factors and brain health outcomes, but there's still a lack of comprehensive data, particularly from lower income regions like Latin America. Therefore, we're still facing significant challenges, such as the underrepresentation of diverse socioeconomic populations, the need for more precise measurements, and the lack of studies of the interplay between socioeconomic factors and biological indicators of brain health. So, as you are familiar with the concept of brain capital, it represents the cognitive reserve that we accumulate throughout life and that also act as a protective buffer against neurological dysfunction. And in this regard, Latin American research highlights the profound influence of social and economic disparities on brain capital, and also has provided compelling evidence that social determinants of health, mental health symptoms, and, for example, cardiometabolic conditions critically shape this cognitive reserve, possibly even more than traditional demographic factors such as age and sex, with, of course, implications for healthy aging and underscoring the need for culturally sensitive brain health initiatives. And moreover, globally, studies are revealing that education and cognitive abilities are more predictive of social cognition in aging than age itself. And for example, in Colombia, social determinants of health are found to be key predictors of cognitive function, suggesting a significant impact of socioeconomic disparities. And additionally, the emerging field of brain clock models that are predictive models that assess the difference between our biological and our chronological age has shown that healthy individuals from Latin American countries with lower socioeconomic levels and larger disparities present increased brain age gap values, meaning that their brain seems older than their actual age compared to those counterparts from the US and Europe. And so here I want to reinforce the fact that this isn't just a health issue, it's a big roadblock for a country's progress. As if our brains aren't well, it holds back our ability to come up with new ideas and growth economically and promote, of course, brain capital. At the Latin American Brain Health Institute of the Adolfo Ibáñez University here in Chile, we aim to broaden the research spectrum to address these disparities and to also empower leaders on brain health in Chile and across Latin America through various initiatives. We are taking as the PhD and the BrainLab Fellowship in Brain Health, also the European Latin American Brain Health Academy, and we are now implementing a national implementation framework for the development of brain capital in Chile, among other initiatives. BrainLab is important that it's part of a broader consortium which is dedicated to collect, harmonize, and standardize data on brain health across Latin American countries. And this promises to steer us toward research strategies that embrace inclusivity and equity and consider disparities and heterogeneities in our population. BrainLab also is at the vanguard, strengthening capacity building, advancing implementation science, and promoting science diplomacy. We are creating collaborative networks of professionals to translate research into actionable strategies that are currently relevant and scalable, aiming for a significant impact on brain health at the global level. And finally, just one actionable example. I want to present our Brain Health Diplomacy Toolkit, which is available in 3 different languages And this toolkit provides resources for cross-disciplinary collaboration with case studies and stakeholder engagement frameworks to promote equity in brain health. And with that, I want to thank you as we navigate through these critical discussions and work toward impactful solutions on brain health. And I look forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Josefina, for sharing with us your, I think, work and putting a focus on the socioeconomic disparities. How do you see all of this interacting in the workplace? So, in fact, since our webinar today is about brain capital workplace and how to enhance brain health overall for prosperity and for flourishing, how do you see what you're doing within your university interacting in a systematic manner to improve the workplace for people? And then, of course, as you know, disparity, socioeconomic disparity doesn't come by itself, right? So it comes because of the overall labor market, which is not eventually pricing correctly the labor eventually, or there are other aspects that are natured in the macroeconomic policies which might have influences in the on the overall disparity. So how do you see all of this from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a huge thing. We are seeing that in Chile. It's sometimes difficult for us to incorporate some policies and development and materials that are developed in higher income countries because their reality doesn't adapt to our reality. In fact, in Chile, we have the issue that 40% of the population lives in the capital, in Santiago de Chile, and even the things that we are implementing in Santiago, they doesn't adapt to the current status of other more rural areas in Santiago de Chile. So what I want to bring here to the discussion is that we really need to take into consideration and in the discussion these inequalities and heterogeneities in the manner that we take action on the workplaces. So it's very important to hear what their needs and how we can adapt to offer some solutions according to their own realities.
Thank you very much for this contribution. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Kelly O'Brien, who is the Vice President of Prevention and the Executive Director of the U.S. Against Alzheimer Brain Health Partnership. And she's also the lead of Business Collaborative for Brain Health. So Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Harris, and everyone for this platform. It is really quite incredible how the conversation around brain health capital has evolved over the past number of years. And I'm proud now to call many of you friends and definitely colleagues in this fight. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Just before I go to my slides, I wanted to mention just a second about Us Against Alzheimer's. For those of you that may not be familiar, we are a US-based national nonprofit patient advocacy organization, and our goal is to end Alzheimer's. And we do that really through 3 pillars: prevention, early detection, and access to treatments, all with a very keen focus on equity. Individuals, women in particular, those who are Black and Hispanic and other under-resourced communities are at much higher risk. And so it's very important to us that we focus there. So I'm going to share my slides here. Always takes a second to do this. Great. Can you see them? I'm screen sharing. All good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about why an organization that was founded to end Alzheimer's is working with business leaders. And there's three main points to this presentation, and many of my colleagues on this call have already made many of these points. So the first part of this presentation will be brief. I'll get to the nuts of what we're actually doing to implement this, but we believe that preventing Alzheimer's is going to take all of us. That's the us and us against Alzheimer's. We think that engaging businesses in the work can really help us improve brain health outcomes later in life. Many of the previous speakers have made this point quite eloquently. And this global framework that everyone is advancing, Brain Capital, we believe can elevate this to the top of global and national priorities. We think there's an opportunity here to gain some traction in a larger conversation. For us, this is kind of the US picture for us. So some of you may know that a couple of years ago, the United States adopted a new goal as part of its national Alzheimer's plan. So US has a national Alzheimer's plan that has strategic priorities. And one of the priorities that was added as the first ever amendment to the plan was to promote health and reduce the risk factors for dementia. We were very active in adding this strategic national priority to this plan. But achieving that priority, we believe, it really is very important, as other speakers have articulated, to reach people in midlife and earlier, where the risk factors for dementia can be mitigated and we can build resilience. And as others have mentioned, that most midlife individuals are working. So 75% of 25 to 64-year-olds are employed in the United States. So reaching workplaces is a very important audience for us. And as such, we've created a business collaborative for brain health to engage businesses and leading companies in this conversation to help us build solutions. Not admire the problem, not talk about the statistics, but figure out what we can do about it and how businesses can actually help us build together, so that it's not a group of advocacy organizations or even researchers saying, hey, you got to do something about this, you should do something about this, but that they're beginning to be invested in this conversation themselves and coming up with ideas about how to actually solve it. I want to just briefly mention that our definition of brain health, Harris articulated this at the beginning, is very broad. We believe that brain health refers to the overall well-being of and optimal functioning of the brain, that it is not just about reducing risk factors for dementia, but it is about brain health and performance in the present. And that definition is really key for employers to be engaged. And, you know, Sarah talked very compellingly about the arguments about why this is so important for individuals, and even in the macro level later in life as the demographics are aging. But I think that in, at least in my conversations with employers, I mean, they're focused not only on annual returns, but on quarterly returns. And we need to find a way to articulate how this longer term problem that we're solving for, Alzheimer's and dementia later in life, matters to them in Q1 and in Q2 and in Q3 and in Q4. And so connecting this argument around the skills is really important to that conversation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So we do include mental health, physical health, skills, and environmental and social conditions in our approach to this. Others have said this in different ways, but the economy has shifted, right? From, you know, being mostly about equipment and property and inventory decades ago to now being about patents and IP and AI and brand. So the way I think about that is we've gone from things to people. People run the economy right now. Our people are run by their brains. It's just as simple as that. So we have to start investing in our brain power. You all are very familiar with this, but to make this point, again, these are the skills that the World Economic Forum calls out as the most important skills for jobs of the future. If you look at these are skills grounded in our brains: analytical thinking, creative thinking, resilience. The things that it takes to build these kinds of skills and to build brain resilience are also the kinds of things that are helpful in long-term brain health. That's where we feel like the value proposition aligns. I love this cartoon. I found it, so I'm throwing it in for humor. Thought it was very fun. So that's especially important, as others have mentioned, in a demographically aging population. So our workforce right now it's a lot smaller, it's older, it's female, it's non-white. So those are the people, A, that are most at risk for brain health conditions. And it's also true that the labor force participation rate in the US is declining. 70% of that is due to demographic aging. I want to make the point that that is not because older people do not want to work. AARP has shown, and McKinsey and others have demonstrated that older people actually would be interested in working, maybe not in the way that they're working right now, but there is an interest in working. And by the way, the research shows that when you do work, you are healthier. So there's a bi-directional benefit to helping and supporting people to be at work. Part of the reason that people are not at work, in addition to demographic aging, is the health status, right? So our health is worse. We are living longer, but we are not healthier. And in fact, we are less healthy than we've ever been. And chronic conditions are taking people out of the workforce. So it's a double whammy. The demographics are aging, people are not living well. It's a very big problem. And the people that are hardest hit are women and minorities. And by the way, those are the people who are doing caregiving as well. So this is a huge issue. Just a quick note, my best friend is the editor at the Congressional Budget Office that did these numbers. And I'm having a conversation with her last week as she's explaining to me that 3 of her older editors are leaving the Congressional Budget Office, and she's having a panic attack because she's trying to deal with the stress of managing the work that comes with having older people age out of the workforce because the federal government cannot be flexible enough about how they work. And it's just a case, I'm like, well, I'm actually going to show your slides. So I think this hits people and all of us, I think, in really real ways. So one of the ways that we have decided to address this is, as I mentioned, bring businesses together. So we are uniting private sector companies and institutions to optimize cognitive health for better business results. This graphic is really just to show that like businesses, it's about their workplace and their workforce, but they have outsized impact also in their communities, right? And they also have a role to play in the products. So if you just think about Walmart is bigger than the US public health system. And it's also situated in communities of great need. They also sell food and they also have a healthcare system. So there's opportunities in private sector companies that I think are not just in their immediate workplace, but also within the environment in which they're situated. They have great influence. So we do think it's very, very important to think about and with businesses about how to address some of these issues. I want to point out, as Sarah mentioned, AARP is a huge supporter of this initiative, GN Group, Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and us. We are part of the AARP's business arm of Brain Health Action. So I feel it's very, very aligned, all of the work that we're doing. I want to just give you a quick glimpse. This is, please don't hold me to this. This is our, but I wanted to show you that in addition, by the way, to having monthly roundtable meetings where we bring in experts from all over the world to talk about these issues, primarily a lot of companies. So Sodexo, Bank of America is presenting next month, just talking about how they're thinking about these issues. We also are building real tools and real solutions, we think, to some of these issues. One of the things we're doing, and I know there's many out there, is developing a brain health scorecard. We're working with Mercer and Hero Health to identify some of the workplace well-being interventions that are most beneficial to brain health. And I want to also point out that this is not just about benefits. It's about, we know that from the evidence, the things that work in workplaces are not just giving employees a slew of things that they can do. It's not a downloadable app that connects you to a therapist. That's great. But what's more important is that it's part of the strategic plan of the organization. We need to get this out of HR and into the CEO's office. Plenty of the people on this call have made the argument that this is an economic imperative. This has to be something that the CEO and the C-suite sees as a priority, not as an extra nice to have benefit. Right now, employees are, they're an expense on the asset ledger, right? And so the first thing to go when budgets get tight or you don't hit your margins are the extra benefits, right? We've got to stop that from happening because humans run the business. So we need to move this over. So here's some of the things that we're thinking about. We will share these slides after, but eventually we want to get to some good, solid resources, toolkits, and incentives that help employers, help communities, and help consumers make better choices and decisions that have a real impact. The ultimate goal is to improve collective brain health, right? Both the improvements in functioning and skills and resilience, but also prevalence for us, prevalence of risk factors that lead to poorer brain health in later life, and improve results for business. So working with business together to identify what those most important results are. It may be different for different businesses. It may be different for different divisions within different businesses. For example, Shell, who's an active member of the collaborative, one of their hugest priorities is safety. So they need to be able to show that the things that they do for mental health, for brain health, for well-being has safety outcomes on a quarterly basis. So those are the kinds of things we're working on. these are just some of the other organizations that are involved. There's others, but we are excited and eager to grow this and very happy to have others join us. So if you are interested, please just let me know. And we would be happy to talk more with you about how to do that.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for your introduction. I have one question which also relates to what you mentioned in your presentation. So a lot of companies, the majority of them, they maximize their value and their financial value. So in fact, in many sectors, many employees are put under chronic stress to maximize the profit and to maximize the benefit for their employers. And I think this very difficult to assess over the years. And when you are in your 20s and you start a job, you start being put on a stress path. And then after 20 years, eventually is a chronic stress path because you have a profit and loss statement that you need to have. So, and we know based on the research that there is exposure to chronic stress has a significant negative impact on the brain capability in terms of volume, in terms of the capacity, in terms of quality, and then eventually over time it will accelerate some patterns of dementia or Alzheimer eventually. So this, of course, we need to see more research in that sense. So how do you see this over the years in a company or different companies? Because at the end, when you move from company to company and you don't have this data, so you don't know in reality what is responsibility. Is there a responsibility for companies to take care of this, or what is your view on it?
I really appreciate that question. I had a key business leader say to me that none of this is going to happen in a very cynical way, I thought, but none of this is going to happen because people move around. And what's the return for an employer to invest in a long-term health of somebody if they're just going to leave later? Didn't appreciate the comment, but I found it very helpful. To your point, I think that's part of what I'm saying is that I think that we need to build that more evidence about the immediate impact of doing some of these things. Yes, addressing chronic stress now and over time will help with long-term brain health, but we need to show, and I think we can, that addressing stress in the workplace will help with annual returns as well, right? That this isn't just a bet that they're investing in someone someone else is gonna reap the benefit after they move on or even retire. I think we need to show the connection. So just in a very simple terms, think about like physical activity. Physical activity has benefits, of course, over your lifespan and in your later in life, but it also has the evidence is clear. It has immediate impacts on your ability to mitigate stress, to focus, right? To be creative. So that's not something that employers gain maybe later, like encouraging physical activity and enabling that to happen is something that benefits them directly in the present. So I think that's one of the key things that has to happen, in addition to just changing this conversation about how we think about human beings at the workplace in general, which all of you are doing.
Thank you, Kelly, for your comments. And then our next speaker is Erica Coy. She is the co-lead of the McKinsey Health Institute. So Erica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It has been such a great dialogue, and I'm excited to try to add a couple of perspectives here at the end. I'm just going to pull up my slides. Great. Checking that you can see the slides fine.
Yes, now yes.
Great. So just at the very beginning, as you alluded to in the introduction, McKinsey Health Institute is a nonprofit generating entity. We are entering our third year. We're associated with McKinsey & Company. Our main goal, I think it has been said really well from earlier speakers, is this notion that even though we are living longer, we are not living well. And we think there's real opportunity to add years to life and life to years, as much as 45 billion extra years of higher quality life. And what's interesting is the role that employers can play in this, and this notion of brain capital, I think, is such an untapped opportunity to really dive into. We do focus on a number of different areas. Brain health is one of our big focuses, and the ways we work are through convening and enabling leaders, advancing research, and also promoting worker capacity and other topics. Okay, checking that you can still see slides fine.
Not anymore. See the slides.
Sorry, hold on one second. I'm just going to fix one thing. I appreciate the flexibility. Okay, seeing them again?
Give it a couple of seconds. Not yet here. Not yet. Now yes.
Okay, great. So I'll jump back in. We have defined health in 4 parts: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. And I think that a lot of this comes together with an integrated view of the well-being of an individual, which certainly plays into the notion of brain capital. One of the things that we had a chance to do was run a global survey across a number of countries that got self-reported status on these dimensions. And I think that this included about 30,000 colleagues. And what we did was we looked at respondents across the board, focusing on employees, and asked them about their health. And you'll see that while it's positive that about 57% have reported good holistic health, that certainly still leaves an opportunity. Another way we have cut it is based on reported burnout, things like cognitive impairment, exhaustion, mental distance, and emotional impairment. We have 1 in 5 employees globally experiencing symptoms of burnout. This certainly, as other speakers have mentioned, has implications on productivity, on presenteeism, and on the broader health of a community as well. Something we have focused on is what we're calling the opportunity gap. So if you look at this, the left-hand side here is decreasing burnout symptoms, and the right-hand side is increasing holistic health. And if we really think about the role that employers can play to help employees achieve their full potential, and really lean into the concept of brain capital, it isn't just about addressing some of the burnout symptoms, it's also about supporting good holistic health. And about 50% of employees are reporting suboptimal holistic health, higher burnout symptoms, or both. And what is good news here is that this is addressable. It does not need to look this way. There are proven levers and interventions and things that can do to improve the numbers and move the needle and have an impact for many employees. And our most recent paper, we have a report out called 9 to Thrive. And in this, we outline 6 key enablers that employers can use to really promote employee brain health and well-being. Some examples of these: social interaction, mindset and beliefs, productive activity. An interesting example here is that employers have the opportunity to help people in their communities to connect to meaningful and productive activities, this underlying sense of purpose. This is a really interesting one that connects to the notion of spiritual health. We have a paper coming out on that soon. Stress, economic security, and sleep, all significant ones. And all of these can start to play into the notion of brain capital too. And interestingly, employers have levers across all of these and how they're setting up the broader workplace and dynamics that can make a big difference. What we've tried to do is measure what the upside could be here. We think that there's true meaningful upside for global economies and real value that could be captured for employers. You'll see the way that we have measured this up to 11 trillion in upside by investing in employee health and well-being is assessing both the direct costs of the poor employee well-being and the benefits that could really be created through good well-being. So you can see some of the offsets that can be found here. And what we have found is that really investing in improved employee health can help capture significant value for organizations. Not only is it the right thing to do to help our community more broadly, but it also is a smart business decision. So we have a number of other deep insights, but I'll stop there just so we have a chance for discussion, any questions, and opening it back up to the other speakers too.
Thank you, Erica, for this overview. I'm very happy to see that McKinsey is working on this topic and really giving this holistic view on the health of people within their own organization. Now, I have one question to you. When there is an extreme event within a company, within an economy overall, and then, of course, some employees in specific, I would say, positions, they have to act in a very short period of time. And this happens, for example, many times in the financial sector, in the financial crisis, where people haven't practically slept for 1 week trying to find a solution for their own organization within an economy which is collapsing. So how do you see this impacting the health of people over time, particularly the people who are going through this type of extreme shocks once or 2 times in their work life?
Mm-hmm. It is an excellent question. And I think when we think about just the notion of stress and stressors, that it's helpful to acknowledge and remember that stress in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's needed to help us learn, grow, and develop. And there's always optimal levels of stress that can contribute to better performance. But what you're describing, I think some of that consistent stress without the breaks to really find the right renewal and resilience certainly can be challenging. And I think often what we find is if leaders at the top are experiencing that sort of consistent ongoing stress without some of the chances for reinvesting in themselves, then what that really leads to is it kind of is a ripple effect across the broader workforce. And I think sometimes it can be tricky and challenging to find the right moments to create breaks in that stress. But I think it's something that's really important to be aware of in terms of how we try to lead from the top.
Thank you very much, Erica, for this. Now we move into the discussion with the discussant. I would like to invite all together Opali Nanda. Opali, she's EVP and Global Director of Innovation of HKS. Our friend Steve Carnavali, who is the founder of UCSF Dyslexia Center and also the California Mental Health Commissioner. Alfredo Matteo, who is a co-founder and partner of ESO Venture, and Dr. Lawrence Jones, Senior Vice President, Edison Electric Institute, and also professor at the Monash University. So if I can have our discussant on screen, please, together with the speakers. Perfect. Thank you very much. I hear the screen in front. I would like to ask everybody to switch on their cameras. Then we will start our discussion now. So, Upali, Steve, Fredo, Lawrence, you have heard our speakers, and I would like to give the floor to each one of you to react. And how do you see, from your point of view, the actions, the strategies, framework to enhance the environment and to promote and to improve the environment for the workplace and to enhance brain capital? So I would like to start with Upali.
Thank you so much, Rem, and thank you to all the speakers. This has been a very inspiring morning. Especially, Harris, you set it up with the framework of brain capital. Sarah, the membership that AARP has is so huge that it was really interesting to see that perspective followed by a perspective out of the US and then the business perspective to close it off. I think the one perspective that I would bring to the conversation is the critical role of the environment, of where we are. And in a growingly digital world, one of the things that is not very well investigated, but is creating a disconnect between people and planet, is the connection to place. And that hasn't even been explored at all. So we can talk about what we can do within the workplace. We can talk a lot about all these innovative open workplaces and getting all these elements into the state-of-the-art workplace. But that connection to community of a workplace and connection to neighborhoods and what it means to create a city that is thriving, because all of these business centers are part of the community, and all of these business centers that are part of the community are part of a place that is codependent on the climate. I think that's the link that in some ways has become broken as we have become such a robust global workforce. In our own research, like we are living labs right now, we have 3 functioning living labs that are testing brain health hypotheses. And one of the things we've noticed is our global networks are growing, global connections are growing, and local connections have gone down. One simple consequence, for example, of hybrid work is you don't support local businesses anymore. Business districts start changing. But in connecting to the local businesses, you were talking to somebody which had nothing to do with work. You were spending time that was outside of work because you had all of this transition time that was built in. You were bringing brain breaks into it in a very organic way. So I think there's something that we need to unpack in what the digital world costs us when we are trying to pursue this goal of brain health and brain skills. We've been working on the Brain Healthy Workplace with the Center for Brain Health now for a couple of years. And as we are investigating, like even things like multitasking becoming a chronic disease. Because we were doing this as a webinar, all of us were multitasking perhaps a little bit. I was multitasking, taking notes, but I wasn't fully present because it's easy for me to be not fully present. What's the cost of that over time? And training ourselves to be brain healthy in terms of people, process, policy, and place. All 4 of those integrated with technology has to be a very intentional employer initiative. It has to be incentivized both by employers and embraced by communities. And we have to embrace what is called a co-benefit framework. So everybody can see the benefit to themselves wherever they stand. So that's kind of what I would start off with. And I really appreciate that we are creating new measures and new collaboratives and no coalitions. What we need now are new prototypes. We need prototypes that go out and test it and really push the envelope in terms of outcomes. And I will raise our hand to be your prototype and lab for anything this collaborative needs. Thank you, Rim.
Thank you, Opali. This is really a very important recommendation. Of course, we need to move to action and see what works and what doesn't work. And probably we also need to share all the practices globally, but who will do that? That's the main question. Probably you mentioned, Kelly, it was Sarah who mentioned that there is a WHO, but I think we need beyond WHO. Steve, what do you think about all of this?
Good morning, Rem. Nice to see you in this important brain trust of brain capital. This is such an important topic because when we get to brain health and healthcare in general, we always tend to start with diseases, and we miss this opportunity to elevate the positive side. These are complex issues, but when you look at it through the brain, they're a lot less complex. As some of you know, my work focuses on the neuroscience of the brain as it cuts through education, through mental health, through workforce development. And I think the common theme here is that the thing the part of the brain we understand the least about today is the social emotional brain, which encompasses fundamentally our relationships between people. And we have confirmed through research. I have a startup company, Spark, that is delivering performance and well-being together in a platform, which Kelly and Erica and others have mentioned is possible to do. And the deep research shows it all comes back to relationships. If you have toxic relationships, workforce performance is down and health declines and people leave, as Alfredo was saying in the chat. Positive stress, we think about stress as bad, but the Tom Brady, I'm sure, had a lot of stress trying to win the Super Bowl. So it can be a very positive, motivating force. And humanity is really driven by our belonging and our purpose in life. And so that's why work is such an important aspect of this, and the relationships come into play. So I would just say the research shows that building relationships between people, not just individual, but team relationships, which ultimately lead to working together, accomplishing things, creating amazing innovations. Those are all positive aspects of workforce, and they cut across everything that we do. And I'll stop there because it's such a big topic, but it's a great topic.
Thank you, Steve. We are starting to decipher all the elements within this big topic. I think this is essential, at least to start talking about it and then go for actions. Alfredo?
Great conversation. And Kelly said, how do we get this into the CEO's offices? And I believe the way to do it is to create more CEOs, because this is not going to be solved from the top down. It's going to be solved from the bottom up, right? I think that's something that's coming across from most of the conversations. Solutions need to be community driven. Innovation comes literally, right? Like a seed takes root in the soil. Plants don't grow from the top down, they grow from the bottom up. And our planet is full of entrepreneurs, is full of dynamic people who live in communities who want to solve the challenges that they're faced with. I support small business entrepreneurs. Small business entrepreneurship has been on the decline in the United States for 40 years. There's literally less and less of an economy for small businesses because the larger corporations are taking up more and more of the economic space. And I think that is contributing to brain health disparities, to this negative brain economy. The things that we're seeing, the environmental impacts, are being reflected on us people, and on our health and our well-being. So the solution is we need regeneration. We need to invest in community solutions. We need to invest in community corporations. We need to invest in collectives of small businesses coming together, because shared ownership is the way that we're going to get healthy workplaces. A CEO doesn't necessarily care about the health of their employees because the employees are going to leave. But when the employees own the company, when they have a seat at the table on the cap table, when communities have stock options in the companies, if a business grows and is community owned, as the business grows, the community grows. That's the kind of things that we're piloting in East Oakland. We're going to pilot a community corporation that is a combination of potentially 100 small businesses with community ownership, the most vulnerable residents having a seat at the table. And that's how, right? Like everyone's like, well, how do you do community investment? You literally give community ownership of companies. And then these companies have to be able to get procurement contracts. They have to be able to access capital. Small businesses are too small. They're too vulnerable. I think that there's an opportunity to aggregate folks, but I'm impressed by what everyone has shared today, and I look forward to seeing where this all goes.
Alfredo, thank you very, very much for bringing this aspect of employees-owned companies. It reminded me when I was in Canada, in Montreal. I was running the International Institute for Cooperatives, and we've started to work on the stakeholder value model. And in fact, we tested the cooperative model which more or less worked in certain sectors. But I have a colleague who is a professor of leadership, and he said the best way to go forward, leadership and management, he said, it's the employees' own companies, and this will really fit into what you mentioned, the bottom-up approach, and I think this is probably the way forward for really enhancing this collective prosperity. And thank you for bringing this up. I mean, yeah. Lawrence?
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I perhaps should say I'm maybe the newest person to this environment, if I may. So I was drawn into this after I connected with Harris. He came and spoke at an event at the Edison Electric Institute where I work last week. And it was an intriguing conversation because he spoke to a group of utility executives from around the world. And he and I both thought it would have been Lawrence, why did you bring this guy here to talk about brain capital? But he literally became a rock star in the sense that we got more demands for him. The topic was right front and center, because one of the things we do as an organization, we work with utilities all over the world. And, you know, I have a few comments on what I've heard so far, but I think the point about the workforce, and as we transition the global energy system, and we have to deal with issues around resiliency, we have extreme weather events. If you think about the guys and girls who keep the lights on, or the workers who are out in the field trying to make sure that the emergency workers, their stress level and the things they go through as you add extreme heat to the situation. I was discussing about climate change having an impact based on the work that was done, this report from the ILO. It is clear to us now in the electricity sector and increasingly in other critical infrastructure sectors that brain capital is something that requires by far more attention than we've given it as an industry globally, and also just looking at it from the specific geographies. What I've heard so far has been very, very good. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Rotterdam at the World Energy Congress. And I was thinking about this conversation yesterday, or this panel, and thinking of the agenda. And interestingly enough, this agenda, there are about 3,000-4,000 people here from around the world, ministers and the likes. And the notion of brain health, or even the brain, is not even on the agenda. And you see this across the world when you go to many of these major conferences discussing, the energy transition. You talk about, all the big changes we want to bring to the world. For some reason, the brain hasn't factored in it. And so, I've taken a lot of notes, and when you get to go last, you don't have much to say, because everything you wanted to say was, as Steve was talking, I was checking off, and I was checking off. But there are two things that I had written down that didn't come up that I want to bring up. The first one is, I'm very concerned that the conversation about workforce is too much about the aging workforce. I understand why, but if you look at the world population today and you see the 2 billion more people living in the global south, they have a different kind of brain capital challenge, which I believe will have a bigger impact on the world. Because if you're a young kid sitting in a cobalt mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo, your brain health is being deteriorated much faster than if you're a kid sitting in Washington, D.C., or in Brussels, or in Stockholm. And I don't know whether any focus have been put on, and I love the conversation from Josefina talking about Latin America, but I think the global south, the brain deficit, the negative brain capital that is going to be emerging in the global south could have a bigger input on the world, because a lot of the goods and products and services that is consumed in the global north comes from the global south. And so when companies are looking at their business model now, the question they're going to be asking Harris and the likes is, look, my supply chain is highly dependent on what happens in India, in parts of Africa, in parts of, the Middle East and elsewhere. How do I think about the brain health of the rest of the world, not just the developed world? And so one question I had for Erica and is, when we talk about the global analysis that McKinsey have done, and great work, by the way, it would be good to understand the percentage of that population that actually is represented in the global South. Because from a business perspective, you mentioned Walmart. 70% of Walmart's goods comes from the global South. And I can tell you that his focus is not going to be on the brain health for the young workers in America. His focus will be on the older work or the young workers in other parts of the world. So that's just one thought I have. I think the other point, and I think Alfredo and to some extent Steve was getting into this, is I'm concerned about the how do you tell the story about brain health? So when Harris and I had this conversation in front of the audience, what was so intriguing was they all came up to me and said, "We've never heard this before." And they were stunned. In fact, they almost didn't want me to invite Harris from the beginning when I said we're putting him on the agenda, because brain health is not factored in the same way as, say, for example, ESG, right? So I'm not an expert in the brain. I'm more of a systems thinking kind of person. But the more I look at this, the question is, how do we as a community tell the story about something that I believe will have real impact? One last point I will make at this event, our retired CEO was at the event, and he came up to me because I asked Harris the question about, is sort of a brain deterioration in inevitability? And I think the first speaker, I think Erica maybe or Kelly talked about it. I don't remember who, but someone talked about it, Sarah maybe, that is not inevitable. And I asked him, Harris, the question in front of the entire audience: what do you do to extend the health of your brain? And that was the question that most of those CEOs found interesting, because for them, it's like, are there things we need to be doing now to help improve our health? And then the last comment I may come back to the community has to do with the young people. So different communities have different stressors, right? So I'm in Rotterdam here, and I can tell you, looking at these folks, they all bike to work. I mean, there's this huge bike trail, and you see them biking to work. The communities, the cities have been built for brain health, right? The communities in many parts of the world is not built for brain health. So to the extent that, the conversation about brain health, because brain health sounds so nerdy, it sounds so sort of neurotic, if I should use that word. We need to find a different way to talk about brain health so that the average person can understand. After my first interaction with Harris, in my house now, we have changed certain things we do with our kids when it comes to time on their computer, time on their cell phone. So there are a lot of things that we need to do there. So I'll stop there. But so far, I've really, I actually canceled my meeting at the World Energy Congress to sit here for 2 hours, because I think this is such an important topic for our industry. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lawrence. This was really to the point, and I think your emphasis also on the global South is essential. I mean, we at the Euro-Mediterranean Economics Association, our focus is the interaction between Europe, Mediterranean, Africa, but then obviously we see those challenges, and there is a lot of work to do to factor in these aspects that you mentioned. So I see the time running. It has been a fascinating discussion, but I would like to take a bit more time from my colleagues and from all of you. So I would like to go straight to Erica. You heard what Lawrence, Alfredo, Steve, and Upali mentioned, so please react on this. And if you have any final comments and probably ideas to move forward within this discussion, would be very helpful for us also within the Brain Capital Alliance to continue working on it. Please.
Sure. I appreciate the questions. I think if I start, Lawrence, with your just survey question, it's an excellent one. When we do global surveys, we try to ensure that we have a presence across all continents and that we really get the sampling right, and also work with individuals in those regions for some of the translations and back translate and cultural context, and would be happy to dig into some of those comparative findings with you. I think it is really interesting when not only are there often cultural differences of what stigma exists, what terminologies of health are even open to a society, but also just the role that the employer plays and even thinking about health. Obviously, insurance systems are different, setups are different. And so we do find a range of difference. I think what has been fascinating is despite some of the expected differences, there's such a ubiquitous sense of this perceived weight of employees, that regardless of the nature of the workforce around the world, this feeling that one, as you saw, the feeling of burnout, the feeling of suboptimal health, how they're perceiving their own mental, physical, social, spiritual health. But we do find in some of the work different sorts of interventions of ways that may be effective at reaching certain employee bases. So I appreciate that point. And I think it's so important to take a more localized view as well. Upali, one of your comments really struck me. I think that this notion of how to really get employers to care about and invest in their local communities. We are putting a lot of emphasis into place-based change and healthy communities and healthy cities. And I think that there's no way to achieve that if employers aren't activated in their local communities. And so we also are eager to really be testing and finding what is the underlying value proposition, what's the right way to communicate this to employers to get them to realize the benefits that can happen. And I think it all becomes cyclical then. The more they're investing in child health and more people are graduating, and then they have a stronger workforce, the more that they're supporting the broader community, their employees can be present. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And I'm excited to hear others talking about this on the conversation, so we can figure out how to really excite and energize CEOs around the world to realize the opportunity they have to be paying attention and focusing in this way.
Thank you, Rika. Kelly?
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. Jones, I really, really, really appreciate your comments, and just a couple of thoughts on nomenclature, brain health. I wonder at the beginning of the ESG discussion how many people knew what ESG was. I constantly buck up against this notion that brain health is a challenging thing for people to get their quote heads around. And I don't know, I think it's going to be interesting to address it in language. People may have different ways of articulating it based on cultures and situations that they're in. I'm not sure there's a magic answer. I think part of the challenge is that this concept of brain health capital is very new, period. And what we're all doing is changing the conversation. And my bet is that this conversation will be more ubiquitous and people will have a better understanding. And I really want my nieces to know what their brain health is and what it means and what they can do. So I'm eager for those conversations to happen. I think there's so much that we can do to connect the young and the old. And you're right, this conversation was much on the aging demographic, partly because I guess where I sit, it's from a little bit of a US centric position. But I think hopefully what's exciting to me about this entire endeavor is that the things that put younger people at risk and promote brain health in younger generations are the same things that help us as we age. So I don't think that those things are different. And I'm excited about the opportunity to connect those dots together. And apparently my dogs are too.
There is also the longevity. Harris and I were in the longevity summit in Milan a couple of weeks ago. And I think many countries are going and to face this longevity trend. And we need to find solutions for it. And we need to find those solutions as soon as possible from the day we start in school for the next generation. Perhaps our generations and the other previous generations might have been caught without some formal preparation, but then for sure we need to prepare for the next generation for these trends. Josefina, what do you think of the discussing comment?
Yes, thank you. I want to say that I stand with Lawrence. I think that the underrepresentation of the global south in research and the global dialogue, it's a really critical issue. that needs immediate attention. Because firstly, the predominance of data and the actions and the perspectives come from high-income countries, and that creates like a skewed understanding of the global challenges that often leads to solutions that aren't applicable to or sustainable in diverse contexts. Then I want to add that the wealth of knowledge and the lived experience in the global south holds key to innovative and culturally relevant solutions, yet this potential remains largely untapped due to the systematic inequalities in resources distribution and also in the academic recognition. So there's a pressing need to democratize knowledge creation and dissemination of all the brain capital things, and that's it.
Thank you, Josefina. Sarah?
So I very much appreciate those points about the global south, but I would say that keeping that in the foreground of the way we're developing solutions is key. One of the things that the Global Council on Brain Health has been doing is thinking about building equity and the importance of focusing on low and middle income countries in the global south in particular is interesting because that's where the population growth of aging population is happening. So there is a keen focus, I can tell you in conversations with the World Health Organization and others on the points that you're making, but bringing forth both data and solutions from those communities about what's working effectively, I think is absolutely key. And I would say that the lessons learned from low and middle income countries and less resourced communities are critical, not only in those communities, but also in the global north. Because in the United States, if you look at the discrepancies and disparities amongst the community of, as we describe them, more vulnerable communities being that people of color or women or traditionally disadvantaged, they face some of the exact same situations, not to necessarily the same degree, but solutions that will work economically, effectively, driven by the community and not put upon people, but instead asking for their involvement from the start for those solutions are going to be key. And then I really want to address the aging aspect of it and appreciate the point, Dr. Jones, that you're making, that it's not just about the older workforce. I think that that's key. And in fact, we talk about weathering in that it's all about cumulative lifestyle effects. So you mentioned, for example, somebody in the Congo, if they are in their 20s and 30s and they are experiencing these disadvantages or not having things in their environment support their brain health, they're never going to reach their 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we simply have to think about this as a lifespan concept and stop thinking about it just as age. It's a proxy for cumulative weathering and disadvantage. I think Upali's point is actually quite related to Steve's in social connectedness. The idea that place is what facilitates appropriate, good, healthy social connections. Now, you may remember in the presentation what prevents people from implementing good brain healthy behaviors, not knowing what works and those around them. If you create environments that support social connectedness, support human better relationships at work, you're going to change the equation. Instead of being the constant weathering, it's going to be the constant support by creating places where there's good light, ability to hear well, ability to see well, ability to engage with others, to support the creative growth and flourishing that you talked about. I love the 9 to Thrive that Erica is talking about. But place facilitates that. And if you create the place and the environments in which that's possible, you're going to create those situations. So I'm so excited to hear this. And Alfredo, you were talking about the exact same thing. When you create agency by people looking for their own self-control of running their environment, running their companies, running their economic future, you're creating brain healthy, stimulating environments. So I love this panel and the varied perspectives, but it really does all drive up to better opportunity for brain health and creating the right space and place to do so.
Thank you, Sarah. Harris, I'm sure you are very excited to give us the way forward now.
Well, I think a couple of points to conclude on. This discussion has been amazing because it has been so holistic. In the workplace discussion, we normally talk about, either depression or anxiety or late life issues or neurodiversity. But with the brain capital framing, we've brought this all together, including built environment as well, and including global South being engaged. So I think this is a transformative discussion, really. And the question for us is now, how do we action this in the future? I wanted to then say that if Lawrence is saying that I was some kind of rock star at his event last week, I think Lawrence is the rock star today, which is a higher honor, Lawrence. One of the things that Lawrence has me thinking about now is the context of brain capital in energy transitions. And Rim, I think this is important in the context of the Euro-Mediterranean countries that you work in the south of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. There are many countries that are starting the energy transition. There are some that are in the middle of the energy transition, and this is a fraught time. It's a collective intelligence challenge to get the transition happening to start with. So how do you get people motivated and inspired and understanding the right facts and information? And then when you're in the middle of the energy transition, when you're sunsetting fossil fuels and going to green energies, that creates a lot of friction and tension between the old industries and the new industries, can create animus, social discohesion. And so these are all questions of human behavior. And so now Lawrence has me thinking about the role of the brain positive economic transition as a foundation for the energy transition. And then we can also think about what other transitions are happening in the economy that need good brain capital, adaptability, systems thinking. There's a sort of generative AI transition that's happening now in the workplace. So this point about systems thinking is fascinating. And so I thank Lawrence for illuminating that in the discussion and for setting us off in this direction to think about the role of the brain capital in the context of global economic transitions. William Hines is also very interested in this too, Rim, so we can discuss this further. And then the final point is, given we've really just scratched the surface of this topic today, I wanted to flag that we are doing 3 brain days at the UN General Assembly in New York in September. So we're just in the early stages of planning that agenda and program. So challenge for all of us on this call and folks listening in is, how much do we want to include this discussion and continuing it and refining it and actioning it at the UN in New York? Because I think it could be a great forum with people coming in from all around the world. So that's a question to be asked, and let's discuss that in the coming weeks. So that's all from me, Rim. Thanks so much again for leading this and for convening all these wonderful people.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you, everybody, for this great discussion. I think this is not the end of it. We will continue interacting with these international experts, and we will continue this work under the Brain Capital Alliance and the leadership of Harris Iyer, who is really pushing forward for this transformative brain economy toward the positive economy. And for us, this is also essential for having an economy which really serve the people, serve the environment, and really be prosperous and enhances our flourishing. So thank you very much for this great discussion. And I would like to thank all the team of EMEA and all the technical support for making sure that this webinar is running smoothly. And then looking forward to see you again in other webinars that the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association will organize. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.